Hello everyone and welcome back to the second round. Today we have a relatively fast matchup, that's why I'm recording on my own. We have Aragorn against Raph and Mikey, a matchup that you don't see too often these days, I would say, simply because Aragorn is not that popular anymore. I guess most, or if not all of the Aragorn pilots or ex-pilots switched over to Spider-Man, since it's obviously the more efficient deck. Nonetheless, I think Aragorn is still pretty good. In this matchup, it pretty much comes down to, presenting some small bodies, as Aragorn does here, while maintaining the control, simply by playing counterspells, I would say. Trying to get Raph off of the board, even if it resolves. I mean, there are some cards that are a bit nasty to handle, City of Solitude, for example, or Defense Grid, but Aragorn does play Kata Commando and prismatic endings and stuff like this in order to get rid of those cards. Sorcery speed, but still, here we see the Kata Commando, for example, that could take care of one of those cost-reducing artifacts, ramp artifacts, which the Raph and Mikey player does not yet present. So here, it looks like it's a relatively slow start from Raph and Mikey, at least from my experience. Actually used 4 mana to create 2 treasure tokens along, or excuse me, across 2 turns. We have the Legion Land and we have the Havenwood Battleground, I think it's called, the one that you can sack in order to produce double mana, but all of those cards do not seem to work around counter magic for now, and Aragorn is definitely presenting some counter magic with 4 mana open. So the Gruul player deciding to play a Fiery Confluence instead, probably getting rid of those 2 creatures, as well as dealing 4 damage. Okay, and here we see a Wash Away. Probably a good choice, I would say. Currently dealing 5 damage a turn is definitely a clock, and as I said, the Kata Commando is also presenting an option against some of those nasty enchantments and artifacts. I'm curious to see. I mean, the Raph and Mikey lists, they're definitely adapted. Not sure if you've seen our matchup with Quintorius against it. This is a bit of a greedy Solitude here, I feel like, because that's a devastating play. Okay, Pyrokinesis is a perfect card in this situation. I feel like you could have. I mean, I get behind the idea of trying to finish with the Solitude. Then again, there are a couple of answers, and these days the Raph and Mikey lists do feature those answers. Here we have an Aragorn cast, followed up by a Detective's Phoenix. Okay, and if you have a look at the rule list and you see that it's a bit of a different take, we see lots of targets actually. The list that we've played on cam had only the Worm and Emrakul, which most of the time ends up in winning the game. And then you play all the protective things around or whatever ramps you up to that. Personally, I'm not a big believer of the deck. I think it's a crazy glass cannon. But yeah, I think it plays out quite cool, and some people seem to enjoy it. You can sneak some wins every now and then. Some people say it's even worse than Tifa. I'm not so sure about that. I think the deck still needs a lot of setup in order to work, and yeah, there are definitely tons of ways to interrupt the game plan. So Here we have again a relatively slow start. And there's a rampant growth. Okay. That's a card I haven't seen for ages, I think. I'm not sure if the, I would say, quote unquote, stock list does play 2 mana ramp spells apart from maybe Nature's Law and 3 Wizards. I feel like the bringing basics tapped onto the battlefield things are a bit too cute for today's metagame. Most of the time, I think you would like to play a 3 Wizards and search yourself a Tiger to have a Galvanic Discharge or Bolt as a backup against whatever your opponent brings up. And here we have, I think it's a Fertile Ground, the newer artwork. Also interesting to see all those ramp enchantments. There's a Thalia coming down. That can be dangerous, depending on the setup that Aragorn provides. With a Skyclave, that would definitely take care of those 2 enchantments. Here doesn't seem to be the case. We see a Tishana's Tidebinder, a Brainstorm. I think that's a loose focus also. And the rest I cannot figure out. So, oh, it's a Vendilion Click. Okay, not bad. Gets countered by a Red Elemental Blast. That's cool. It's another one of those adaptions. I think the Tidebinder is probably one of the most powerful cards here against Raph and Mikey. You can just counter the trigger. If, let's say, a previous counter failed, you just bring her down and counter the trigger, and Raph and Mikey loses all its abilities. Of course, next turn there could be an Unholy Heat or anything in that direction around the corner that you need to tackle too, but now would be the time to bring it down. Then again, not if your opponent presents 4 open mana. And the Red Elemental Blast was already cast, which means there is not too much interaction. I don't like tapping the Volk here instead of the Sephoric Springs. Not that big of a deal in that matchup, but it's like an overall behavior of, signaling the most mana available. Also, if you would draw like a relevant red spell here, which I can't really think of right now, since Raph and Mikey is quite a big body, 7/7. You won't deal with it by Tishana's Tidebinder, just end of turn. Okay, I think that's not the correct play against this deck. I think the Aragorn player might not have that much experience against it, but you should definitely respect the Raph and Mikey trigger. This guy coming down, I would have not wasted it just for being faster. Seems to be like a greedy play. I mean, there is a loose focus as a backup. Okay. And there is the City of Solitude I was talking about. So that's definitely something that you need to take care of. Oh, we also have a change the equation. So, I mean, his hand is suited to deal with all of those cards. That's not a problem. But, now, since you had to counter that, you're left with 1 counter spell. And you have to gamble a bit that this is enough. The only card that could interfere here, if, let's say, a counterspell against Raph and Mikey would not resolve, is a Veil of Summer, which I think the Raph and Mikey player plays, or most lists actually do, from what I know. Good against Spider-Man, it's good against Tazigul. Here we have a Pyroblast, so another card. That's also an interesting decision to quote-unquote waste a Pyroblast on the Tishana's Tidebinder, because right now it's only 5 for 1 attack. So he's He's about to cast Raph and Mikey next turn anyways, I would assume. And he can still keep up the Pyroblast for some shenanigans there, I guess. So that's a command tower. The one with the dog, I guess. The Yoshi one. So yeah, most likely. Okay, he's also, if he has like another spell to protect the Raph and Mikey cast, maybe he wanted to use the tempo, and that's why he got rid of Pyroblast. Oh, there's a replicated loose focus, and he has the Veil of Summer. That's pretty good in this case. Going in. Let's see. And here we have Ertali, a card that you might know from CDH, rather. I think it's played as a commander over there. So on ETB, each player reveals cards until they reveal a non-land card. And you can cast both those cards without paying mana costs. It seems that Aragorn is a bit confused about the Flameslash. Flameslash coming down, dealing with the voice most likely. And yeah, while you swing in with a bunch of mana. And I would say, from my experience, that's a board that, unless... Oh, I mean, there could be a Flage top deck. And then you can attack with Failure and... Or like a Bolt or anything in that direction. Expressive Iteration, yeah, that makes sense. Trying to look at the top 3 cards. Oh, 2 lands and an Ajani. That's not what you are looking for, I would say. That's a bit sad. I mean, I'm not sure if Aragorn runs Lightning Helix. Most of the lists these days do not, because it's rather inefficient. You have better outs in Jeskai color. But, you know, at least there should be Lightning Bolt, Flage, things like that. Some lists play Ghostfire Slice. That could have sealed the deal, but it's a concession. True Name Nemesis was the last card. Okay, fair. I get that. You won't win any trophies with that. Over to game 3. And it seems that... Oh, Aragorn has a mulligan down to 5. That's rough. But let's see. Starting the game with a Meticulous Archive. And of course, we have a Surveillant on the other side too. Both players deciding to keep the card on top. And there is the 3 Wizards. Okay. And that might find a Tiger. Maybe even following up with a Wildrose or something like that. Not the case. Okay. Here we have the Verge into Fable. That's not bad. So let's see. I spotted a Shadow in the Warp on the Gruul player's hand. Yeah, here we go. This is likely going to resolve since Aragorn used his turn to cast the Fable. Then again, honestly, on turn 4, I would not tap out against Raph and Mikey. There could be... Okay, with 4 cards in hand, a Jeska's Will could do the job in addition to something else. It really depends on the deck list you're facing. This list does not seem to be too gooberish. So he might thought, well, based on the previous games, my opponent was rarely presenting Raph and Mikey on turn 3, 4, whenever. So I can take the time to try and find something. Oh, and here we have an Aragorn cast off of the treasure token. It seems that he's lacking lands, but there is the red elemental blast again. That's a very efficient counter. So now the coast is clear, since Shadow into the Shadow from the warp, whatever. It reduces the... Okay, that's a fast concession already. There's a Blightsteel Colossus coming down. Yeah, that seals the deal. Raph and Mikey costs only 5. In that regards, it was definitely wrong to cast Aragorn here aggressively. He had a Tails End and another counterspell in hand, so he could have dealt with that. Yeah, I think that goes back to the missing experience against the matchup. Maybe Aragorn thought he has a bit more time. Nonetheless, cool match. Thanks a lot for tuning in, and we will see each other in the next round. Bye-bye.